My stepmother told my father's family. I had abandoned him during his illness. His nurses logged every single visit I made. My name is Wren Calloway, and I was 34. The Sunday afternoon, my uncle stood up at my father's birthday dinner and said he had something he wanted to address. My father was sitting at the head of the table. He had been out of the rehabilitation facility for 6 weeks. He was thinner than he had been before the stroke. His left hand still shook when he lifted a glass, but he was there, at the table, at his own birthday dinner, which was something 3 of his doctors had told us in the 2nd month was not guaranteed. My uncle's name is Garrett. He is my father's older brother. He is the kind of man who has always believed that family matters were best addressed publicly and at dinner and without warning. He said he had been hearing things over the past 2 years. He said he thought it was time to address them directly. He said he had heard that during my father's illness I had not been present. He said he had heard that I had left the caregiving to Diane and that I had been difficult when Diane tried to reach me. He said he had heard that I had essentially abandoned my father during the worst period of his life. He said he thought the family deserved to know the truth. 13 people heard him say it. My father was one of them. My father looked at Garrett. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at his wife Diane, who was sitting to his right with the composed expression of a woman who had not expected this to happen at the birthday dinner, but who was not going to spend energy stopping it either. I looked at Diane. She looked at her plate. I put my napkin on the table. I said, "Garrett, I appreciate you raising this directly." I said, "I have something I would like to share with the family." I opened my bag. I placed a folder on the table. I said, "This is a certified copy of the visitor log from Northside Rehabilitation and Care Center, covering the period of my father's admission." I said, "The log records every visitor by name, date, and time of arrival and departure." I said, "It covers 22 months. I said, "My name appears 312 times. The table was very quiet. I said I would like to pass it around so everyone can read it for themselves. I slid the folder to Garrett. He opened it. He looked at the first page. He looked at the second. He looked at Diane. She was looking at her plate. He looked at my father. My father was looking at me. He nodded once, a single small nod, the nod of a man who had known the truth for 2 years and had been waiting for the room to catch up. I nodded back. Welcome back to 2 a.m. Revenge, where the quiet ones who kept every receipt finally get the room they deserved. If you have ever been called absent by someone who was counting on you not to have the receipts, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. My father's name is Robert Calloway, and he built his life around 2 things, his family and his precision. He was a civil engineer for 31 years. The kind of man who double-checked load calculations not because he doubted himself, but because he understood that the cost of error was borne by people who trusted the work. He retired at 63 with a clean record and a reputation that had been built on 31 years of never once cutting a corner that mattered. He met Diane 3 years after my mother died. My mother had died when I was 26, ovarian cancer. 14 months, fast and cruel in the specific way of cancers that do not announce themselves until they are already everywhere. My father grieved for 2 years. He grieved quietly and completely in the way of a precise man who understood that grief was a process with a structure and that shortcuts did not serve it. Then he started going to things again. He met Diane at a community lecture series. She was 55 to his 64. A former school administrator, organized, warm on the surface, the specific kind of socially competent that reads as genuine until you have known someone long enough to see the competence without the warmth underneath it. My father found her energizing. I found her efficient. The distinction mattered. They dated for 2 years. He told me he was going to propose on a Sunday phone call. I said I was glad for him. I meant it. I also said I would like to meet with both of them before the wedding to go through some practical matters. He said, of course. We had the meeting. Diane was warm. She asked about my work. She said kind things about my mother. She said she understood the history and wanted to honor it. I said the right things. I also, because I am an occupational therapist who spends professional life assessing functional capacity and planning for future care needs, looked at my father's age and his health baseline and the specific arithmetic of what the next 10 to 20 years might require, and I said to myself that whatever happened, I was going to be the person who showed up, not because I distrusted Diane, because showing up was what I did. It was who I was. It was the only child in me, and the therapist in me, and the daughter of my mother in me, all saying the same thing. You show up. Whatever else happens, you show up. I showed up. For 2 years through the worst of it, I showed up. And Diane told everyone I had not. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning. My father was 67. He was in good health by the general measures, blood pressure managed, cholesterol controlled, the specific disciplined maintenance of a man who understood preventive care the way he understood preventive engineering. The stroke did not care about the maintenance. It arrived on a Tuesday while he was making coffee, and it took his left side with it. The neighbor found him, called the ambulance, called Diane. Diane called me. I was at work. I left immediately. I drove 40 minutes to the hospital. I arrived 53 minutes after Diane's call. Diane was in the waiting room. She looked at me when I came in. She said, "Thank God." She said she had not known who else to call. She said she needed help understanding what the doctors were saying. I sat beside her. I translated the medical language into plain information. I asked the questions she did not know to ask. I advocated for the specific interventions that my professional training told me mattered in the first 72 hours. I stayed until 9 that evening. I drove home. I was back at 7 the next morning. That was day 1. For the next 22 months, day 1 was the standard I held myself to. The facility was called Northside Rehabilitation and Care Center. My father was admitted on day 4 after the acute hospital stay. He would remain there for 7 months of intensive rehabilitation before transitioning to outpatient care. In those 7 months, I drove 40 minutes each way, and I came every day. Not some days, every day. I came before work on the days I had early clients. I came after work on the days I could not come before. I came on weekends without exception. I came on my birthday. I came on the holidays. I came the morning after a professional conference I had attended in another city and had driven home from at midnight specifically so I would not miss the morning visit. I signed in at the front desk every single time because the facility required it, because signing in was the policy, because I am a healthcare professional and I understand why sign-in policies exist and I comply with them. Every visit, every signature, every date and time, 312 times. I did not keep this record. Northside kept it. It was their standard documentation. I had not thought about it as evidence. I had thought about it as a sign-in sheet. Diane's campaign started in month 4, not dramatically, the way all campaigns start, quietly, one conversation at a time, one version of events planted here and watered there, until it had taken root widely enough to feel like common knowledge. I found out from my cousin Adele. Adele called me on a Thursday evening and said she had been at a family dinner at my Uncle Garrett's house, and my name had come up. She said Diane had been there. She said Diane had talked about the difficulty of managing my father's care. She said Diane had implied that she was doing most of it alone. She said Diane had said that reaching me was difficult, that I was busy with work, that I did what I could, but that it was not always enough. She had not said I had abandoned him, not yet. She had planted the seed that I was insufficiently present. That was month 4. By month 12, the seed had grown. By month 22, it was the story the family had accepted. I found out the full scope of it only at the birthday dinner. I want to tell you what my visits looked like because the word visit does not capture them adequately, and the record deserves accuracy. I am an occupational therapist. I specialize in neurological rehabilitation. Stroke recovery is my specific professional area. My father had the benefit not just of a daughter who showed up, but of a daughter who showed up with 19 years of professional knowledge about exactly what he needed and exactly how to help him get it. I did not replace his care team, I supplemented them. I worked with his occupational therapist, a woman named Grace, who had been in the field for 15 years and who said to me in month 2 that she had never had a patient with a family member as engaged and as knowledgeable. I learned his specific deficits and his specific strengths. I knew which activities of daily living were returning fastest and which were plateauing. I knew his medication schedule and what each medication was doing and what the side effects were, and when to flag something to the nursing staff. I knew his nurses by name, all 7 of them across the 3 shifts. They knew me. They knew I was coming every day. They said, "Good morning, Wren," when I signed in. They told me things about his night when I arrived in the morning. They asked my opinion on positioning and on adaptive equipment and on the specific modifications that would matter when he transitioned home. I was not a visitor, I was a presence. 312 times, every single one logged. Diane was there too. I want to be completely fair about this. She came regularly, not daily, 3 to 4 times a week on average. She managed the administrative aspects of his care, the insurance correspondence, the billing questions, the scheduling coordination. She did those things and she did them competently, and I never once minimized her contribution to my father. I never once said she was not doing her part. I just kept doing mine. Every day, 312 times. She never once acknowledged mine to the family. She did the opposite. She told them I was barely there. The decision to request the visitor log was not dramatic, it was professional. After Adele's call in month 4, I did what any healthcare professional does when they understand that documentation may become relevant. I called Northside's administrative office. I said I was a family member and a healthcare professional, and I wanted to understand what documentation the facility maintained regarding patient visitors. The administrator said the facility maintained a sign-in log for all visitors. She said it was kept for 2 years as a standard administrative record. She said family members could request a copy of the log for their relative's admission period. I said I would like to do that. She said she would need a formal written request. I sent it the following Monday. The log arrived 3 weeks later, a certified copy, every visit, every date, every time. My name 312 times, Diane's name 241 times. I put it in a folder. I put the folder in my filing cabinet. I hoped I would never need it. I brought it to the birthday dinner. If you have ever been called absent by someone who was banking on you not being able to prove otherwise, stay with me and subscribe, because what the birthday dinner looked like when 13 people read 312 visit entries is the reason Diane understood that institutional records do not bend to narrative. The folder went around the table. Garrett read it first. He is a slow reader, in the specific way of men who are buying time while they process information that does not fit the version they arrived with. He turned pages. He ran his finger down the columns. He turned more pages. He set it down. He said nothing. He passed it to his wife Margaret. She opened it. She looked at the first page. She looked at my name. She looked at the dates. She counted something silently. She passed it to my Aunt Linda. It went around the table, 13 people. The folder passed from hand to hand. Each person looked at it with the specific expression of someone reading something that reorganizes what they thought they knew. Diane did not reach for it. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the centerpiece. When the folder completed its circuit and came back to me, my Uncle Garrett said he owed me an apology. He said it directly. He said he had spoken without checking and he was sorry. He said it the way men apologize when they understand the full scope of what they said and mean the apology as completely as they are capable of meaning it. I said I accepted it. I said I did not blame him. I said he had been given information and had responded to it. I said the information was the problem. He looked at Diane. She was still looking at the centerpiece. He said, "Diane." She said nothing. He said, "Diane, I think you need to say something." She said it was complicated. He said 312 visits is not complicated. She said I was not saying Wren was not there. He said you implied she was not. She said I implied she was not as involved as she could have been. I said I came every day, Diane. She looked at me. She said, "I know." I said, "For 22 months." She said, "I know." I said, "I would like to understand why you told people otherwise." The table was very still. Diane looked at the centerpiece. She looked at my father. He was watching her, his left hand on the table, still, for once, completely still. He had always had the specific stillness of a precise man under pressure. He was very still. He said, "Diane." She said, "Robert." He said, "I would like you to answer our daughter's question." "Our daughter." He said, "Our daughter." He had never called me that before, not in the 3 years he had been with Diane, not once. He said it now, at his birthday dinner, in front of 13 people, with his left hand completely still on the table. Diane looked at him. Something moved across her face. Not quite shame, something adjacent to it. The specific expression of a woman who has understood that the man she thought she was protecting her version for has chosen a different version. She said she had been overwhelmed. She said the caregiving had been exhausting and she had not always felt supported. She said she had talked to people about how she was feeling and she had not always been careful about how it came across. She said she had not meant to imply that Wren had not been there. She said she was sorry. I looked at her. I thought about 22 months of driving 40 minutes each way, of learning 7 nurses by name, of working with Grace on my father's rehabilitation plan, of birthday visits and holiday visits and the Tuesday after the conference when I drove home at midnight so I would not miss the morning. I thought about my father's left hand going still, about the specific moment he said "our daughter." I said, "I accept your apology." I said, "I need you to correct what you told people." She said, "I will." I said to all of them, she said, "I will." I said, "Then we can move forward." She looked at my father. He was still looking at her. She looked at the folder on the table. She said, "I did not think about the sign-in sheet." I said, "I know." She said, "You kept it." I said, "Northside kept it." I said, "I just asked for a copy." She looked at the folder for a moment longer. Then she said, "You came every day." I said, "Yes." She said, "I knew you came every day." I said, "I know you did." She said, "I told myself the visits were less meaningful because you had professional training." She said, "I told myself you were there as a therapist, not as a daughter." She said, "I know that is not true." She said, "I knew it then." I said, "Yes." I said, "I know." She said, "I was jealous." She said it quietly. The table heard it. She said, "I was jealous of how much he needed you and how easily you gave it, and I did not know how to say that, so I said something else instead." The room was very quiet. I had not expected that. I had expected the apology. I had not expected the truth underneath it. I sat with it. I thought about what it cost her to say it in front of 13 people. I thought about what it had cost me to carry the accusation for 22 months without fighting it. I said, "I understand." I said, "I am not your competition, Diane." I said, "I was never your competition." She said, "I know that now." I said, "I was just his daughter." She said, "Yes." She said, "I know." She said, "That was the thing I could never be, and I could not make my peace with it, and I am sorry." I looked at my father. He was looking at Diane. His face had the specific expression of a man who has just learned something about his wife. that he had suspected and had not wanted to confirm. He was not angry. He was sad. The specific sadness of a man who loves someone and has learned something about them that makes the love more complicated. He looked at me. He said, "I always knew you were there." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "Every morning when you came in and the nurses said, 'Good morning, Wren.' He said, I heard them from the room. He said, every single day I heard them say your name." I said, "Dad." He said, "I knew." He said, "I always knew." I said, "I know." The birthday dinner did not end dramatically. People ate their cake, they had coffee, they went home. Garrett stayed until the end. He washed dishes beside me at the sink. He said he was glad Adele had warned me. I said she had given me the information I needed. He said, "What made you think to get the log?" I said, "I am a healthcare professional." I said, "I understand that institutional records exist and that they are accurate and that accuracy matters." He said, "Most people would not have thought of it." I said, "Most people do not spend their careers in medical facilities." He said, "Your mother would have liked how you handled this." I said, "Yes." I said, "She would have said I should have confronted it sooner." He almost laughed. He said she probably would have. He said she was never one for waiting. I said, "No." I said she was not. He said, "You are more patient." I said, "I learned to be." He dried the last dish. He set it on the counter. He said, "Wren." I said, "Yes." He said he was sorry for what he said at the table. He had already apologized. He said it again. "Some apologies need to." I said, "I know, Garrett." I said, "I know." Diane called the family members she had spoken to. Not all of them. Most of them. She did it over 2 weeks. She called Garrett first. She called my Aunt Linda. She called 3 cousins. She called 2 family friends. She told each of them that she had not been accurate about Wren's involvement in Robert's care. She told each of them that Wren had been there every day. She said she had allowed her own feelings to color what she communicated, and she was sorry. She said Wren deserved better from her. I know this because Adele called me after Diane called her. She said Diane had called. She said Diane had told her the truth. She said Adele had said she already knew, but she was glad to hear it from Diane. I said, "Me too." Adele said, "Wren." I said, "Yes." She said, "You are a better person than I would have been." I said, "I am an occupational therapist." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I spend my whole career helping people recover from things that were not their fault." I said, "It teaches you the difference between punishment and correction." She said, "And this was correction." I said, "The log was correction." I said, "The apologies were correction." I said, "I have no interest in punishment." She said, "I know." She said, "Your father is lucky to have you." I said, "I am lucky to have him." She said, "Yes." She said, "I could see that at the table." She said, "When he said our daughter." I said, "Yes." She said, "That was everything." I said, "Yes." I said it was. My father and Diane are still married. I want to be honest about that because the story does not end with a divorce, and I do not want to give you a version that is cleaner than the truth. They are still married. It is more complicated now. The specific complication of a marriage after a significant thing has been said in front of 13 people and cannot be unsaid. They manage. My father is well. His left hand shakes on cold mornings. His speech has the specific deliberateness of a man who monitors his words more carefully since the stroke. Not from impairment, but from awareness. He walks 2 miles every morning. He called me every Sunday. He has always called me every Sunday. He called me every Sunday through 22 months of rehabilitation. He calls me now. The calls run long. We talk about everything. I want to tell you about something that happened on my last visit to Northside before my father was discharged. His primary nurse was a woman named Patricia. She had been on the morning shift for 11 of the 22 months. She knew my name before I reached the sign-in desk. She knew my coffee order from the machine in the corner. She knew that I always stopped at my father's door for a moment before I went in, not hesitating, just pausing, and that he always heard me and always said, "Come in," before I knocked. On the last morning before his discharge, Patricia found me in the hallway. She said she wanted to say something. I said, of course. She said in 20 years of nursing, she had seen every kind of family. She said she had seen families who came once, and families who came every day, and every variation between. She said in 20 years she had never once had a family member sign in every single day for the duration of an admission. She said not once. She said she wanted me to know that. She said she also wanted me to know that my father talked about me. She said he talked about me every morning after I left. She said he would watch me walk down the hallway toward the elevator, and he would say to whoever was in the room with him, "She always comes back. She always comes back." Patricia said she had been in the room for that sentence on 11 different mornings. She said she thought I should know he said it. I looked at Patricia. I said, "Thank you." She said, "It is the truth." I said, "I know." She said, "Go take your father home." I said, "I will." I did. The visit log is in my filing cabinet, not because I still need it, because some records deserve to be kept, because the 312 entries represent something more than administrative documentation. They represent 22 months of a daughter doing the only thing she knew how to do when the person she loved needed her. Showing up. Every day. Before work, and after work, and on birthdays and holidays, and the Tuesday after the conference. 312 times. Not because someone was watching, not because anyone was keeping track, because showing up was what I did. It was who I was. It was the thing no one could take from me even when they tried, because the nurses logged it, because institutional records are accurate, because the truth documented correctly by the people whose job is to document it does not bend to narrative. It just waits, in a filing cabinet, in a folder, until the birthday dinner when someone says something at the table and the folder is already in your bag. That is my story. 22 months, 312 visits. One folder I hoped I would never need and brought to a birthday dinner just in case. If someone is telling your family you are not showing up, keep the record of every time you do. Not because you are planning to use it, because the day someone says something that is not true, you want the truth to already be documented somewhere that is not just your memory. Medical facilities log visitors, caregiving agencies keep records, hospitals have sign-in sheets, ask for copies, file them, and keep showing up, not because someone is watching, because it is who you are. And the record will catch up to who you are eventually. It always does. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.